The wind howled through the canyon like a wounded beast, lashing against the wooden frame of the Thornton ranch house. Thunder cracked overhead, and rain pelted the porch in furious rhythm. Silas Thornton, worn and weathered like the land itself, stood in the doorway, his rifle slung over one shoulder and a lantern in his calloused hand. The storm had rolled in fast, too fast for comfort. He was about to bolt the door when he heard it. A cry, high, sharp. Not the wind, not an animal, a baby. He turned, narrowing his eyes against the rain, and stepped down into the mud. The sound came again, this time closer, desperate. His boots sank into the soaked earth as he followed the faint wail to the front gate. Lightning illuminated the figure just beyond the fence, a bundle of cloth barely shielded from the downpour. A note pinned to its side fluttered in the wind. He crouched and picked up the bundle, cradling the child against his chest. The baby, a girl, was cold but alive, her cries piercing the storm. Her skin was pale as milk, and her eyes, a deep, steady blue, locked onto his, as if demanding answers he didn't have. As he adjusted the shawl wrapped around her, he saw it, on her left shoulder, a crescent moon-shaped birthmark, stark against her skin. Silas read the note, the ink running but legible. Raise her as your own. She is your blood. His breath caught. He looked around, but the night offered no explanations, only the howling wind and the endless dark. He rushed back to the house. Inside, Eleanor stood by the fire, her hands trembling. She hadn't slept. Her eyes widened as Silas entered, soaked and holding the infant. "Who is she?" Eleanor asked, her voice low. "Found her at the gate." Storm nearly swallowed her. Eleanor stepped forward slowly, her eyes fixed on the child. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she reached for the girl, but paused as the baby shifted and the shawl slipped slightly, revealing the birthmark. Eleanor's face drained of color. "Where did she come from?" she whispered. Silas handed her the note. She read it once, then again. Her lips tightened and she turned away, holding the baby to her chest but not looking at her. "We'll keep her," Silas said simply. Eleanor nodded, still facing the fire. Years would pass before Clara would ask the question that shook the past from its hiding place, but it all began on that storm-split night, with a baby's cry and a birthmark no one could ignore. If you want to know what happened to Clara and the mystery of her birth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Clara grew with the rhythm of the land, slow, steady, and shaped by wind and sun. By the time she could walk, she already had a way with horses. At 5, she could saddle one better than most grown men. Silas taught her everything he knew: how to ride, how to track, how to survive in a world that respected strength more than kindness. The ranch became her universe. Days began before the sun rose and ended long after it sank behind the mountains. There were chores, broken fences, injured calves, wolves to watch for, and long rides across fields that never seemed to end. And through it all, Silas was a constant presence, quiet, firm, but always there. Eleanor, however, remained distant. She did not smile easily. She rarely touched Clara, and when she did, it felt forced. She kept herself busy in the kitchen or sewing by the window, her eyes always drifting elsewhere. Clara learned not to ask too many questions, but some things even a child could feel. A wall stood between them, invisible but cold as stone. The birthmark, Clara noticed early on, was a subject that silenced rooms. Once, while swimming in the creek with other ranch children, a boy pointed at her shoulder and laughed. "You're cursed," he'd said. "That's the devil's moon." She didn't cry. She hit him. Broke his nose, actually. Silas had punished her, but lightly. Later that night, he'd sat beside her and said, "Folk talk 'cause they don't understand. Don't ever let them decide who you are." Still, after that day, Clara began to keep the mark hidden. Long sleeves, covered shoulders. She never asked Eleanor about it, though sometimes she caught her staring when Clara was turned away. An unreadable expression in her eyes, something between pain and fear. As years passed, Clara became sharper, stronger. By 17, she was nearly grown, her eyes fierce and thoughtful. She worked the ranch like any man, rode like the wind, and earned respect even from the roughest cowhands. But the questions grew louder inside her. Who had left her? Why? Silas never lied to her, but he also never answered. "You were meant to be here," he'd say, and she'd accept it. For a while, Eleanor never said a word about that night, but something was shifting. Clara began noticing more, the way Eleanor's hands shook sometimes when they passed too close, how she always wore long sleeves even in heat, and the way Silas looked at them both when he thought no one was watching. Clara didn't know what the truth was, but she knew it was closer than it had ever been. And she was ready to find it. The sun was barely up when Clara rode into town, dust trailing behind her like a second shadow. She needed salt and horseshoes, and Silas had handed her a list before sunrise. She tied her mare near the general store and tipped her hat to old Mr. Buckley sweeping the porch. "Morning, Clara," he said, his moustache twitching in a grin. "You missed the excitement." She raised an eyebrow. "That right? New marshal came in last night. Big man, quiet type. Ain't seen a lawman with that kind of presence in years." Clara shrugged. Town always had stories. She stepped into the store, the cool air hitting her like a blessing. She hadn't even made it to the counter when the door opened behind her. Footsteps followed, measured, heavy. She turned. The man who stood there was tall, shoulders broad beneath a weathered coat. He wore a tin star, dulled by time but still gleaming faintly. His face was carved from stone, lined by sun and hard days, but it was his eyes, grey and sharp, that held her still for a breath longer than she liked. "You're Silas Thornton's girl," he said, not asking. Clara nodded slowly. "I am." The marshal offered a hand. "Jedediah Cole, folks call me Jed." She hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, steady. There was something about the way he looked at her, measuring but not unkind, as if he were looking for something long lost. "Pleasure," Clara replied, though the word tasted uncertain. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the store's windows. Jedediah glanced toward them, then back at Clara. "Storm's coming," he murmured. She gathered her supplies quickly, aware of his eyes on her the whole time. When she stepped out, he was right behind her. "You ever think about where you came from?" he asked suddenly. She froze, her spine straightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that some folks leave behind more than they intend, and others carry it without knowing." Clara didn't answer. She mounted her horse and looked down at him. "You got business with my family, Marshal?" Jed smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I do." She rode off without another word, her heart pounding. That night she told Silas about the marshal. He said nothing for a long time, staring into the fire. "For you stay clear of him," Silas finally said. "Why?" "Some men bring storms with them." Across the room, Eleanor dropped a plate. The sound shattered the silence. Clara looked up. Eleanor's hands were trembling, her face pale. "Are you all right?" Clara asked. Eleanor didn't answer. She turned and walked away, leaving the broken pieces behind. Clara stood there, staring after her. And in that silence, something shifted. Clara couldn't sleep that night. The wind had died, but something else stirred, restless and thick, like dust settling in a forgotten room. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind circling back to Jedediah's words and Eleanor's pale, trembling hands. Before dawn, Clara rose. The house creaked under her steps as she moved quietly through the hallway. Something drew her toward the attic, the one place Eleanor always kept locked. She remembered Silas once calling it full of nothing but cobwebs and memories. But that morning, Clara didn't want permission. She wanted answers. She climbed the stairs, heart pounding, and tested the attic door. Locked. She went back down, found Silas's spare keys by the hearth, and returned with careful steps. The key clicked. The door opened with a moan. Dust rose in clouds, thick and heavy. Old trunks, crates, a broken mirror, stacks of yellowed newspapers. She scanned the room, eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through a narrow window. Then she saw it. An old cedar chest pushed into the corner, worn from time and heavy with silence. She knelt and opened it. Inside, a faded shawl, delicate embroidery around its edges, familiar and strange. She touched it gently, her breath catching. Beneath it, letters, dozens, maybe more, bound by ribbon, the ink faded but readable, each signed in Eleanor's hand. Clara read the first one, then another. They spoke of grief, of shame, of a child named Lila who had been taken away, hidden. Words like sin, protection, secrecy burned into the pages. One line froze her. "I see the crescent every time I close my eyes." The crescent, her birthmark. Clara's fingers trembled, her lungs felt tight. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't coincidence. She stuffed several letters inside her coat and crept back downstairs, the house still silent. Later that day she confronted Eleanor. She laid the letters on the table between them. Eleanor stared at them without touching a single one. You went through my things, she said, voice cold. I went through lies, Clara replied. Who is Lila? Eleanor stood, her eyes dark and rimmed with fury. You don't understand what you're playing with. Then help me understand. But Eleanor didn't answer. She snatched the letters, carried them to the hearth and threw them into the fire. Clara reached for them, but Eleanor shoved her back. Let them burn, she said. Let the past die. Clara stood in stunned silence as the flames devoured the only written pieces of a truth too long buried. Her chest ached, not from anger, but from the confirmation of what she'd always feared. Something had been hidden from her, something terrible, something hers. That night, the house felt colder than any winter, and Clara knew secrets don't stay buried forever. Morning came quiet and cold. The sky wore a dull grey, and the ranch moved with its usual rhythm. Livestock fed, fences mended, silence stretching across fields. But inside Clara, something churned. She kept glancing at Eleanor, watching for cracks. They ate breakfast in near silence, the clinking of utensils the only sound. Eleanor wore her usual high-necked dress and long sleeves, but as she reached for the teapot, her sleeve slipped slightly. Clara's breath caught. There, for a brief second, she saw it, just above the wrist. Faint, like a shadow that refused to fade. A crescent, identical to hers. Eleanor pulled the sleeve down quickly, her face stiff. Clara set down her cup. Where did you get that mark? Eleanor didn't look up. It's nothing. It's the same as mine. I said it's nothing. Clara stood. Don't lie to me. Eleanor met her eyes then, fierce, haunted. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Tell me who Lila is. Tell me what that mark means. Tell me why you looked at me like I was a ghost. Eleanor's hands tightened around the cup. Her lips pressed into a line, and for a moment Clara thought she might break. But then Eleanor rose, her voice low and cold. Leave it alone. Clara didn't move. I won't. Eleanor stepped past her, heading toward the door. Clara's voice followed. Was I Lila? Eleanor stopped. The silence between them was a chasm, wide and filled with everything unspoken. Eleanor didn't turn around. You need to leave this alone, she repeated, softer this time. You have no idea what damage you could cause. Clara watched her go, her heart pounding. She didn't go back to the house that afternoon. Instead, she saddled her mare and rode toward town. She didn't know exactly why, but something inside her pulled her to Jedediah Cole. He was outside the jailhouse when she arrived, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. He looked up as she approached, eyes calm but unreadable. I need to talk to you, she said. He stood, nodding once. I figured you'd come. Inside, he poured her water, sat down across from her. Clara wasted no time. Who am I? He didn't flinch. I can't answer that. You were there the night I was left. Weren't you? He nodded. Did Eleanor send you? He paused, jaw tightening. She didn't send me, she begged me. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. She begged you. To do what? Jed's voice was quiet. To make sure the baby was safe. No names, no questions. Just get her to Silas. Why? That's not my story to tell. Clara stood abruptly, the chair scraping behind her. I'm going to find out anyway, she said, with or without your help. Jed looked at her then, really looked. You already are. And Clara knew. The truth wasn't far. It was just buried deep. Clara returned home with Jedediah's words echoing in her mind. That night she slept little, waking before dawn with her heart heavy and resolve hardening. There was one more place she hadn't dared go. One more name that now held weight she could no longer ignore. Reverend Ezra. He'd been in town for as long as she could remember, preached with a voice like thunder and eyes that saw too much. He kept to himself mostly, but people said he'd once been close to the Thorntons until something drove them apart. Clara found him tending candles at the back of the empty chapel. Light filtered through stained glass, coloring the room with fractured blues and reds. He didn't look surprised to see her. I was wondering when you'd come, he said. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. I need answers. Ezra looked at her, long and slow, as if weighing her soul. Some truths do more harm than lies. I don't care, he sighed. You should. She crossed her arms. Were you there, when I was left? He nodded. Yes. Why? Ezra's gaze dropped to the floor. Because I helped make the decision. I helped protect a secret. Whose secret? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked toward the pulpit, running a hand along its worn edge. There was a man. Powerful. Ruthless. He had no business touching a woman like Eleanor. Clara's stomach tightened. She was young, Ezra continued, desperate for affection. He offered kindness, then control. When she found herself with child, he told her to get rid of it. But she didn't. No, she ran to me and I... He paused, voice thickening. I loved her, Clara. Enough to do what she asked, even if it meant watching her suffer. Clara stared at him, her voice low. And me? What was I? Ezra turned to her, pain etched deep into his face. You were innocence. You were a threat. To him. To his power. If people knew... He trailed off. What would they know? Clara asked. That you're not just someone's child, he said. You were meant to die. Silas was her last hope. Clara's breath caught. She thought he'd raise me. He did more than that. He saved you. Silence stretched between them. Outside wind stirred through the trees. Finally, Clara asked, Does he know who my father is? Ezra hesitated. He suspects, but he's never said it aloud. And you? Ezra met her eyes. I know, but it's not my place to speak the name. Clara turned to leave, her hands clenched, but before stepping out she looked back. You helped save me once. Help me again. Ezra gave a single nod. Ask Eleanor what she's hiding in the portrait room. Clara didn't respond, but now she knew where to look next, and the walls around the truth were beginning to crack. The house was quiet when Clara returned. She didn't go to her room or the kitchen. Instead, she walked straight to the hallway at the back, the one no one used, where the wallpaper peeled and time seemed to settle thick in the air. At the end of it hung portraits, ancestors, distant relatives, forgotten memories. Clara had passed them 100 times without much thought, but today one painting called to her. A woman, seated, regal yet somber, dressed in a pale blue gown. Her eyes were unmistakably Eleanor's, but what made Clara's breath hitch was what the woman cradled, a baby, wrapped in a shawl embroidered in the same pattern Clara had found in the attic. She stepped closer, eyes scanning every detail. Then she saw it. The baby's shoulder, just visible, bore a faint mark, a crescent. Clara's hand trembled as she reached out, touching the frame. The truth wasn't just written, it had been painted into the walls of this house. Behind her, footsteps creaked. I never wanted you to find that, Silas said. She turned slowly. His face was drawn, older than she'd ever seen it. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, voice quiet. She looks like you, Clara said. She should, he replied. She's your mother. Clara's throat tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't mine to tell. But you knew. Silas nodded. The day I found you at the gate, I knew who you were. I didn't need the note. Clara looked back at the painting. Why did she give me away? She was scared, pressured. That man, he had power, influence. If word got out that she'd had his child, Silas trailed off. She thought giving you up was the only way to keep you safe. Clara turned to him. And you just agreed. I didn't agree. I fought her on it, but in the end I made a choice. If I couldn't stop it, I'd at least make sure you were raised right. Loved. Protected. You should have told me. I wanted to. But every time I looked at you, I saw her. And I saw how much it cost her. She broke, Clara. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Clara was silent for a long moment. Did she ever regret it? Silas walked toward her, placed a hand on her shoulder. Every day. But she didn't know how to face it. Clara stared at the painting, the shawl, the child, the mark. The lies were no longer hidden, but the weight of them still pressed heavy. I need to hear it from her, she said. Silas nodded. Then ask her. She's been waiting for years. Clara didn't move, but something inside her had. Clara left before dawn, a satchel over her shoulder and her father's revolver at her hip. She hadn't told Eleanor, not yet. She needed answers, not apologies. Ezra had mentioned a place, a town no longer on maps. Broken Rock, once a mining camp, now a ghost of whispers and rot. The ride was long, the land rough and wind-bitten. Hours passed in silence, save for hooves striking dirt and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. By midday, the town came into view, collapsed roofs, hollow windows, and weeds growing through wooden boards. But one building still stood, an old house, half leaning, half alive. Clara approached, hand near her revolver. She knocked once. A woman opened the door. Thin, grey-haired, her eyes sharp despite time's pull. She looked Clara over, then nodded as if expecting her. You're late, she said, stepping aside. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old paper. The woman motioned to a chair. Name's Mabel. I was a midwife once. You've come for the truth. Clara nodded. Mabel studied her. You've got your mother's jaw and his eyes. Though God help you for it. Clara's voice was tight. You delivered me? I did. In this very house. Your mother rode in under a false name. Desperate and scared. Paid me double to forget. But some things don't leave the mind. She didn't want me dead? Mabel's face hardened. No, but others did. Men came asking questions days later. Lawyers, riders in clean boots who didn't belong out here. They weren't looking to help. Clara felt her stomach twist. Who sent them? Man named Whitmore, a senator back east. Eleanor begged me to keep quiet. Paid well for silence. I never heard from her again. Why would he care if I existed? Because men like that don't like loose ends, especially ones that bleed. A sharp crack outside broke the moment. Gunfire, far but close enough. Mabel stiffened. They found you. Clara was already on her feet, drawing the revolver. How many? 2, maybe 3. Not locals. Hired. Through the window, Clara saw the dust rising, riders closing fast. She moved quickly, overturning the table, taking position. Mabel loaded an old shotgun and stood by the door. Still got some fight left, she muttered. The shootout was brief, but violent. Clara dropped one man with a shot clean through the chest. Another grazed her arm before falling. The last turned and fled, spooked by her aim, or her name. Afterward, Mabel bound Clara's wound in silence. Then she handed her a folded letter. Your mother left this, told me to burn it. I didn't. Clara opened it. Only one name was written. Whitmore. And beneath it, 3 words. He must never know. Clara folded the paper slowly. Her heart burned, not with fear, but with clarity. Now she knew who hid her, and who still wanted her gone. Clara rode back with the letter pressed against her chest, its words etched into her memory like carved stone. Whitmore. The name had power even in silence, and now it had weight. She knew who he was, Senator Thomas Whitmore of New York, respected, untouchable, the kind of man whose hands never appeared dirty, though the blood ran deep beneath his shoes. Back at the ranch, the sky was heavy with dusk when she arrived. Silas waited on the porch, arms crossed. He took one look at her bandaged arm and didn't ask questions. I know now, Clara said. Silas nodded once, slowly. I figured you would. Inside the fire crackled. Eleanor sat alone, her hands folded, face pale but calm. She looked up when Clara entered. It was him, Clara said. Whitmore. Eleanor closed her eyes. Yes? I'm his daughter. You are. Why did you hide it? Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was afraid of what he'd do, of what it meant. I loved him once before I understood what he truly was. Clara paced, her steps sharp. He tried to have me killed. Eleanor flinched. He didn't want a scandal. I was supposed to disappear, but I couldn't, not completely. So I turned to Ezra, then to Silas. I thought, if I let you go, you'd be safe. Clara stopped. You thought I'd never ask. That I'd never need the truth. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. I was wrong. You had the same birthmark, Clara said. You knew I'd see it. I covered it for years, Eleanor whispered. But you, every time I looked at you, it came back. The guilt, the fear, the love. Silas stood silently by the hearth. We could have faced it sooner, he said. But none of us were brave enough. Clara turned to Eleanor. You should have protected me. I did, she said, in the only way I knew. Clara's voice broke. By giving me away. Eleanor stood, crossing the room slowly. By letting you grow with strength, with love, with a man who taught you how to be whole. The silence was long. Then Clara spoke, her voice low. He still wants me gone. I know, Eleanor replied. So what now? Eleanor's eyes met hers, steady, clear. Now we stop running. Clara nodded. Then we do it together. In that moment, something shifted. Not the past, not the pain, but the space between them. It didn't heal all wounds, but it opened a door. Later, alone in her room, Clara stared out at the fading horizon. She wasn't just a name or a secret. She was a storm, and the man who tried to erase her was about to learn that blood didn't make a daughter. Fury did. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Whitmore's shadow still lingered, but Clara no longer felt powerless beneath it. She'd come face to face with the truth, and now, for the first time, she could breathe without doubt. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had found its place. Eleanor moved with more presence in the house. She no longer avoided Clara's gaze or hid her hands beneath long sleeves. One morning, without a word, she laid a hand gently on Clara's shoulder, fingers trembling but not pulling away. It was small, but it was enough. Silas returned to the rhythms of the ranch, but there was something different in the way he looked at Clara now, not as a child to protect, but as an equal, as kin forged by choice, not blood. Clara spent more time alone on horseback, riding out to the hills at dusk, watching the sky bleed gold into violet. The land felt different now, no longer a question of where she came from, but where she would go. One evening Eleanor sat with her on the porch, the hush between them warm, not cold. "You still wear his name," Clara said. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I can't erase what happened, but I can stand beside you now." Clara looked out at the fading light. "I'm not going to run. If Whitmore comes, I'll face him." "You won't be alone," Eleanor said. And she meant it. The threat hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled them. Ezra had sent word he'd found a lawyer brave enough to begin asking the right questions. Whitmore's past had cracks, and cracks could be widened, but for now there was stillness. That night, Clara walked through the ranch with slow steps, the lantern in her hand casting soft light on familiar walls. She paused by the fireplace where her father's rifle rested. Above it, the portrait still hung, Eleanor holding the baby. Clara smiled faintly. The child in the painting was no longer a mystery. She was her, and she was still here. Outside, she stood in the dark, looking up at the sky. The stars blinked down, silent witnesses to the storm she had endured. "I'm not your secret," she whispered into the night. "I'm your reckoning." In the distance, a horse neighed softly. Wind rustled the grass, and Clara Thornton, daughter of silence, truth, and flame, turned back toward the house that had raised her. Not broken, but whole. If Clara's story moved you, subscribe now to follow more powerful journeys like hers. And don't miss what happens next. Click on the video on your screen for another unforgettable tale.